Okay, it's going.
Okay, we're at Columbia Heights interviewing Ginger Sage. And today is May 17th, 2012. And our first question is, what brought you and your family to the Entiat Valley?
God, we were all born here.
How about mom and dad?
Born here.
Born here? And their parents?
Their parents were pioneers, yes.
From?
My maternal grandfather was an electrician, and he came from Okanagan, where he and his brothers were all electricians and carpenters, and they came to Homestead. Their name was Woods. There were so many of them, they called it the Forest Reserve.
So about when did they come?
1905, and it was the day one of the big Indians was buried. They came on the steamboat to Brewster and then took the coach, horse-driven coach, to Okanagan. And then later on, one of the main jobs my grandfather had was to run the Entiat powerhouse. And that's in that book.
So how did you or your family make living over the years?
Well, my grandfather was employed as the manager and engineer of the powerhouse. And on my father's side, my father's mother was a teacher, and her grade book is in the school records, and she taught several places, among them Ardenvohr, and she taught in that big school with the big chute down the side. We have several pictures of her. Grandfather was a ditch walker in Entiat, and he also ran his orchard.
What's a ditch walker?
The water came from the Entiat River around the side of the building, the side of the mountain, and individual ranches were given so many acre-feet of water, so he had to pull the little slot gate, I guess it was, to let the water run to someone's orchard or to stop it and let someone else's water run.
He walked the ditch to make sure that the ditches weren't plugged. There's nothing plugged and there was no leaks in the dike.
Can I tell a story about that?
Sure.
He was out there in the backyard because of his house, which was by the little hill. He and some neighbors were doing something. I was about 2 years old or less, and I walked out there, toddled out there to talk with him. And I knew the word fish. That was my first word, was fish. They were getting fish out of the ditch. And I remarked to my grandfather, fish! And he tried to tell me, no, those are dogs. Because as it turned out, you're not supposed to get fish out of the canal. But there were so many fish there that there were people coming from all over with buckets. And these fish tails were waving. They were as tall as I was. Finally, he gave up and he had my aunt come to get me. Because I was quite interested, I read the different newspapers for that time, and there was an unusual large migration of Chinook salmon on that month and that year. And they were fish, not dogs. They were fish.
Let's see, who were your neighbors?
One of the interesting things about neighbors is in this book. Can I?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Because most of the neighbors were of the Quaker faith. My grandparents on both sides were not of the Quaker faith, but their neighbors certainly were. And the first story in this book is by a well-known Quaker, and she, I guess Packwood was their name. Yeah. Quakerville by Ruth Packwood Schofield, there we are. And because they were such close neighbors, much of this first chapter, called Quakerville, is about my grandparents also, because the children grew up together.
So things that brought them together were church
School,
and school.
the big school. My grandparents were not Quakers, so they did not attend that church. Finally got the Entiat, the other Entiat community church started.
So are you related to the Schofields?
No,
Okay.
just in love.
Just,
I used to go visit them at Colonial Vista. Other things that brought them together was my grandmother was the only piano teacher, and everybody took lessons from her, so that was a meeting time and place. This book has several of the programs. So those two things. Well, they often had community dinners and potlucks, which I think Entiat still does.
What events or hardships do you remember from your past?
My past? Hardship. Money. If you had pennies, you could buy candy at Bert and Jesse's drugstore. Now, I never had any pennies. But you went real hardships.
Fire, earthquakes, floods,
None of those.
none of those.
Not for my personal history.
health?
What?
Health?
Health? Well, of course, I had the polio at that time, and the school was stopped, and that was October the 12th. School was stopped for a month, and this is one of my books which itemizes some of that. So, because it tells you, it answers that question, the hardships.
Okay.
But I have to find the package. On that day, between July 1st and December 31st, 1934, there were 743 reported cases of infantile paralysis, with 54 deaths in Washington state. That's a total state. And that's why they closed the schools everywhere. Another interesting hardship was that this one school reported that they opened, but carefully, and that every child in the total school was examined by a nurse once every 2 hours to see if there was any sign of the polio, when they would be whisked to a hospital or the school would be closed if there were too many. The reason that in 1934 that I was in an iron lung for a while was that that was a newly invented thing, and for some reason they had it here in Wenatchee at the St. Anthony's Hospital. My doctor was Meyer, M-E-I-R, I believe is the spelling of his name, and the current Wenatchee Valley Clinic is named for him, the Mayer's Clinic. And my mother said, well, if you have any trouble, go back to that doctor. But she told me his name, but not how to spell it, and I've all those years spelled it M-E-Y-E-R instead of M-E-I-E-R. And at the times when I should have been able perhaps to speak to him about what I remembered, I didn't have the correct name until much later. I suppose we had other problems, but those were my personal handicaps or difficulties in being an Entiat member.
Well, on an entirely different subject, how did your family put food on the table? Did you hunt? Did you garden? You obviously liked fish.
You ate fish whether you liked it or not.
Let me preface my answer by saying that my grandmother's journal is the best source that I have for what people ate, because she itemized it in her journal, always. There were long lists of what they ate and who brought what. They often had potlucks. And it was usually things that you could easily get from your garden or from the local. She once described having purchased a pound of bacon from the store, which was the Heading store, but she said she left it by the back window and a dog stole it. So they had no bacon. My particular family in the 40s, our father worked for the Ribbon Cliff Orchard Company as the foreman, and there were 3 or 4 families that lived there at Ribbon Cliff together, and everyone shared what they had. And if someone went fishing, then they shared that. If someone shot a deer, they shared that. Unfortunately, someone shot a bear, and our father did his best liver and onions bear dance, saying how good liver and onions were going to be from this bear. It didn't convince me. And when they finally served it up on the table, this liver and onions, my brother would eat anything. He was happy to have that. But the dog sat under my chair, and they forced me to put it in my mouth, but I took it out again and fed it to the dog under my chair. And from that moment, I have never taken one more bite of anything dead.
The dog was happy?
The dog was overjoyed. Yes, always sat under my chair from then on. My parents were concerned because I was really, really skinny, and you have to look at this book, Parents' Blood, to see how skinny I was. This is a picture of the skinniness of a person who just recovered from polio. And so they didn't make too big a fuss. They talked with, I knew they talked with people. What shall we do, they said, because she will not eat any meat. How are we going to feed her? They said, just put a jar of peanut butter and bread and a big glass of milk on the table and let it go at that. So they did that, and that's mostly what I had to eat. Nobody, excepting there was one other time. Some things I remember that I did like because I didn't know they were meat. And one of them was fried chicken. And our mother did a good job, and there were chickens everywhere. So how they didn't know that this was happening until our little brother set the house on fire. That our mother sat us down to a lovely meal, and it was lunch. It was summertime, so school was not in session. And I remember that it was a fried chicken dinner, and it was quite nice. But she pushed all the dishes back, and she said, now children, I want to talk to you about something. She said, I know that you've been smoking on the roof. You see, she believed in talking to children, not wham, why are you? How she didn't know that before our brother got the matches, I don't know. But she said that, don't you know that you're smoking will cause nobody to like you when school starts? She said your teeth will get brown, your clothes will smell funny, nobody will like you, nobody will play with you. That did it for me. I went quickly out to brush my teeth, but my brother said he thought that he would continue to smoke because all his friends smoked corncob pipes. And he thought that when school started, he and his friends would probably continue to smoke. Our mother started at that point to weep and wail, and she said that he was hooked, and she felt so terrible that he was hooked on smoking. And she never thought her son would be hooked. Well, none of us knew what hooked meant, but it was obviously something really bad because she was crying. I knew it was fake crying, but she continued to cry. My brother was getting really nervous, but she said, Georgie, Mama will help you get unhooked. She will help you kick the habit. I remember she used those terms. And he said, okay, Mama. And so she said, you can have one pipe full a day, but you have to smoke it in the kitchen with me. I went out to play. When I came back in, there was Georgie having his pipe full of his corncob pipe filled with honeysuckle seeds. But he was sitting on top of the refrigerator, cross-legged, blowing smoke rings, and I was jealous because I could blow smoke rings, and I still can blow smoke rings. So when our mother left the room, I asked for a draw on his pipe, and he said that yes, that I could, but he had let the fire go out, so there wasn't any smoke. But there was a cupboard nearby, so we started experimenting with what food we could put in these pipes to make good smoke. And you know what we found the best was coffee. Boy, it made a really nice smoke, and we were puffing away when our mother came back in. And she screamed is what she did. And that was the end of that. What was the question again?
It was, how did your family put food on the table?
And you were talking about peanut butter. They put peanut butter down.
Yeah.
How difficult was it to get peanut butter?
At Risk Store, they always had peanut butter.
Okay.
And Risk Store became really important right before the Second World War. And it was our main source. Lots of pictures in here of Risk Store. During those times, pre-war years, it was the family went together to the store and they bought whatever. Plus also there was another grocery store. And in the picture in here, I did the sign for that store, painted the sign. I'll think of the name of it in just a minute. But during the Second World War, which was really big for our family, we were living in Seattle by that time, and we lived in Seattle during the time of all the time that the war was active. The folks had a trailer they hooked to the back of the car because there weren't very many places that even had food. You have to consider that. And all the neighborhood would get in the car with us and go, and they would buy caseloads of whatever was available. So we ate a lot of strange things during the war. One of them was rockfish. Rockfish was a substitute for salmon, I think. It was awful. I did not eat it, but everybody else did.
Back to smoking. Did you ever try to smoke a grapevine?
No, I was through smoking.
Oh.
Yeah, I brushed my teeth every day after that. None of that smoking for me.
Well, the next question was to describe the old town of Entiat that you remember. And you've already done part of that by saying the store.
Yes, one of the things that I remember from my childhood, maybe being, again, 2 years old, was the wooden sidewalks. And they were planks, probably 1.5 inches. And when you jumped on them, they made a wonderful sound. And that was my occupation when we went to town, was to jump on the sidewalk. And it went from in front of the post office, which originally had been the bank, but up past Bert and Jesse's store up to Dewey's Cafe. As I grew up, of course, we moved to Malott for a couple of years. When we returned to Entiat, which we always did, and that may be the name of one of my books in the future, would be We Returned to Entiat, because we always did. They had replaced the wooden sidewalks with cement, and I could not believe it. That's one of the tragedies of my childhood, losing those wooden sidewalks. In high school, a friend in my class lived right across the street and worked at one of the cafes. It was Gritzmacher's Cafe, and so we often went in there because she would wait on us, this friend, and maybe bring us seltzer water, which didn't cost anything. That
was before bottled water, huh?
Yes, that's right. It was a long 2 blocks with a nice cross section there at what originally was the bank. And in here, the Wolf family remembers when the bank failed, and they describe when it failed. Something else happened on that day. After that, the bank became the post office. And my mother was the postmaster during most of the time of my high school years in Entiat. And when we went off to college, we just wrote a letter home. It would just be to Entiat, Mom at Entiat, because she was the postmaster. And about that time I learned to drive. I didn't learn till I was 17. For some reason, maybe we didn't have a car, I don't know. But most of my job was to do errands around town for my parents and the rest of the family. Pick my brother up from high school, go get the groceries at Risk store, or whatever else we needed. Risk, by the way, had a charge account. You could just charge stuff, much to my father's horror. I was allowed to go charge whatever I wanted. And guess what I would charge? Bolts of material. That's when Dan River came out with polyester. And remember the Dan River fabric? It was a little stiffer than it is today. Oh, you could make the best clothes out of that. And it was much better than the feed sacks of my early grammar school days. Picking my brother up from his high school football or basketball, whatever he was playing, was again one of my jobs. And I often found him after school down at the big red telephone booth. There was one telephone booth, and it was in front of Gerson's drugstore. And they would be he and his friends would be calling their girlfriends in Wenatchee, and they would leave the phone off the hook and not pay. So by the time I got there to get them, the phone was ringing, and the operator would say, "Deposit 50 cents, please." Well, I didn't have 50 cents. This was a handicap for me again, was the money, as I mentioned.
What other businesses were in town? You mentioned a drugstore.
Yes, and Billy McDonald, who was in high school with us, worked at the, it was not a hardware store, that's where you could buy your dishes and other.
Like a variety?
Let's call it that. It had a name, I think. Right beside that was a watch store. there were about 3 or 4 gas stations in town, some fixed cars also. And the one, as time went on and I managed to get 50 cents, I would always just buy 2 gallons of gas for 50 cents. It was 25 cents a gallon. And then my friends and I could go to town, maybe to Wenatchee. That was a big deal. So the Chevron station was down where you went up the river, and then was a Mobile station where I once painted the sign of the flying horse. They gave me $10. Then at the other end was the Ford garage, and I don't think I ever bought gas there. There were about 3 stations.
Was there a doctor's office?
I don't remember a doctor's office. I once was injured at my grandmother's house, and she put me to bed and she went to the doctor. Brought me home paper dolls to play with so I would get well. Ugh.
You have been telling stories from your past. Can you describe someone you remember? We've just named a park in Entiat for Albert Jones, and Bob Whitehall said they called him Abby Dabby.
Yes, I never knew the Abby Dabby. I do remember the park, however, which was then named Sacagawea Park, or maybe it was named after Chief Silicosaska.
Oh, the park.
Might have been,
City
because
Park.
our high school annual was also named Chief Silicosaska, or just, that was the first Indian chief of that area. And there's quite a bit in here in Schofield's article about how the Indians were integrated into the town. So I remember that park, and we had my first white elephant, what would you call it, sale there, and everybody bought things. And of all the things, someone gave me $1 to spend. Oh, yes. And what I did was I got an apple box. I was probably 9 years old at the time, with $1 to spend. And I bought books. Every place I went, I bought a book. Put them in this box until the box was so heavy I couldn't even pull it across the grass. And I heard people laughing. The whole town was standing in a circle around me trying to move my box of books. And somebody brought my mother over, and she started sorting through these. You know, you can have this book, you cannot have this book. But I did get a number of books, which that summer I read every book several times. They were almost always about the First World War. And they were my books. The little kids couldn't have them. You ask other places.
Other people.
People. Well, there was a Risk grocery store, and there was another grocery store, and I said I can't remember the name of it. That's silly because it had a name. Peter's grocery store. I bet that was it. The Peters family was friends with my parents, and their children were about the same age as I was, as was the Cozart family. The Heading family had one of the original stores, and my uncle married Charlotte Heading, and I was one of the people who took care of Charlotte in her last days. And lo and behold, they had a big closet full of many of the early strikes for the Entiat Times, the newspaper. I don't know what happened to those, but they used to sell the Entiat Times at the Heading store, and her job, she said, as a little girl, was to run down the hill and help fold the newspapers to sell at that store. People that I remember, Will Risk was very influential all the time until I left Entiat to go to college. Because he sold the bolts of fabric, and he had a charge account. You could charge anything you needed, which I liked. Of course, the teachers, one of the teachers was also Helen Kinsel, had been my mother's teacher, and also she taught while I was in high school in the business area. But I don't think I ended up having a class from her, but we knew who each other were. Also, I think probably, as far as the townspeople, the Wisdom family. And there's a nice picture of one of the Wisdom houses in here. They lived next to my grandparents, and often Beth Wisdom was my babysitter. My cousin and I were often taken care of by Beth Wisdom in her high school years. We have pictures of Beth. She was the kindest person, and we always enjoyed having that experience. Every place we lived, there were very important people. I was probably very social and made friends easily. My brother, on the other hand, when he was in high school, he's going to deny this, but Ace Roundy was one of the policemen in town, and he told our father that if my brother didn't quit doing certain things, he was going to have to pick him up. He was the town sheriff. Ace Roundy was also our bus driver, and I enjoyed him. You asked me to name people. Boy, the list just goes on and on. We, high school chums, we always stayed over with our friends at their house, and they stayed in our house. And we were very close. There were 12 members of our graduating class. Neela Nee, the Nee family, and her mother was a Cozart. And the Olin family, the Olins were two Don Olins. Barbara Olin, we still talk today. She also, I know how old she is, 82. She graduated with our class. Virginia Wilson, the Wilson family. I remember Virginia in a story that I wrote for this book, Entiat Remembers, of the flood of 1948. That was the year our class graduated. And we did not get a party because of the terrible flood. But we all went up to Ardenvohr to see the log jam. But when we left to come back, the road was gone. It had washed away. So we had to leave our family car in Ardenvohr with friends. And during the process of transferring things, suddenly we realized our sister was not there, George and I. And he rose to the occasion and started asking people if they had seen our sister Maxine, and they had not. But by the time we got down to the Roaring Creek Bridge on foot, climbing through the orchards and through the forest because the road was gone, we were in time to talk with Virginia Wilson, who lived very near the Roaring Creek Bridge. And we heard it scream and just awful noises. What would you say? It was like a dragon as it ripped loose from its pier and went on downriver. But she told us, yes, she had seen our sister who went with another friend on down the river walking. So we were relieved by that. Otherwise, we would have had to go home and say, we can't find our sister after the flood. Oh, you know, and my mother was also a very strong person, as evidenced by the fact that she got me through the polio with as little problem as possible. Not all problems were solved, but you know, she was a strong person. You wouldn't dare die. You wouldn't dare be bad. She was everywhere. She knew everything you were doing.
Isn't it amazing moms have eyes in the back of their head?
Yes, and always talking to the teachers, talking to the sheriff, talking to the other adults. They belong to everything. They especially belong to the Grange at Entiat, and were instrumental in building that Grange Hall, which they now call it, I think. Still the Grange Hall, isn't it? Yeah. I was going to say that my mother instigated girls' club, I think it had some kind of a name, but it was mostly just a social club, so we could sponsor dances and picnics and things like that, and we did. And the Berkeys, who often would be their picture is in here, would be our chaperones for dances. And at that time, I was probably a junior and senior in high school, and I learned what the town club was. That was boys young men who had already graduated, who would come to our dances. They could all dance very, very well. But it was scary to see the town club. And guess who they were? Howard Pillsbury and one of the Harris boys, I'll think of his name. His mother was one of the young Harris girls. Anyway, it was a nice, happy place to grow up, people-wise.
Okay, this question says, what part of Entiat's past that no longer exists do you miss the most?
Well, of course, that's the whole town. It was destroyed, I guess is the word, moved during the time I was in college. Interestingly, I was at the University of Washington, and I thought I wanted to be an architect, so I was going to school over there. And that's when the whole town of Seattle architecture population drew a wonderful plan so Entiat could move into this new town. And they had a mall and shops and so forth. And it never happened. I saw the plan. It never happened because the town couldn't decide on who got the money. So there was never a focus for that town except the store. The grocery store, and the Chevron station seemed to be the focus as I returned to Entiat as a young person, college graduate.
This is kind of a strange one. Did your family have a barn?
A barn? Did we ever? My father bought it from the Coles. The Cole family lived at Winesap, very near where you folks live now. And they used to sell milk. And their barn was on a hillside, so they just shoveled the manure out, and down below the barn was this fantastic garden spot.
So you have good memories of the barn.
Well, yeah, it was old.
It was old but good.
Stinky.
Yeah. Oh, well, the last question is, what do you appreciate about the Entiat Valley?
Well, just this, that we love each other, and that we always have things to say. And I can keep together with my 82-year-old chums from high school, and we talk on the phone still, and cry together and laugh together.
Okay, Judy has read quite a few questions here, and we've asked you different questions. Is there anything that we omitted that you would like to talk about? You would like to talk about your books.
Well, yes, I would, but I'd like to talk about the end of it, because I gathered this, and it took me a year to write it, and I had lots of help. But the end part I did myself, and that's when I listed all the people alphabetically and put the page numbers down where you could find something about them. And if it is boldface, that means there's also a picture. And I found that this is the main thing that people liked about it. They could find themselves or their relatives. I then started doing an index of subject matter, and I thought from that I should write a novel about Entiat. And forthcoming would be a novel about my parents who were born and raised in Entiat. And their parents came, as of course, from other places. My mother's family from Carmel in California, beautiful place. And my father's family from Illinois and Indiana and Kansas, in that area, where they had all gone to college. And they all revered education. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that all the elderly folks instilled in our parents their values, which were education, and I mentioned that in here, as well as teaching. So when my brother and I came along, as well as the younger children, our parents thought they knew how to raise children, and they wanted to raise us by talking, no hitting. We will always discuss things and make sure that we have discussed until there is nothing further to discuss. And so they did that, but they never expected my brother. He was every place. He could do, and he did everything. And so the book would be about their surprise that he was in trouble. How did he get in trouble? We raised him right, but they raised him as permissive as possible. And that's one of my themes for another book about Entiat. For instance, he made his own corncob pipes and smoked them on the roof of the house. Yeah, stuff like that.
Your brother would be interesting to talk to.
He'll tell you that none of that happened,
Oh.
or that I did it, but that's not so.
And somewhere in between we find the truth.
But you see, I don't know, he had the gift of gab. He could make you believe anything. And when we were just first and second grade, we caught the bus up by the road in Malott, which is where we were. And across the street there were cows, quite a lot of them, behind a fence. And he told me, he said, those are bulls. And he knew about bulls. He said, they will chase you, gore you, kill you. And you know what they chase? They chase the color red. Look at your lunch bucket. It was red. Oh no! For years I carried my lunch bucket under my dress so the cows wouldn't chase me.
Okay, thank you. We're going to end the interview here.